Welcome to today's deep dive. I want to start off today by asking you to think about a highly specific but probably very familiar feeling.
Oh, yeah. It is definitely a familiar one for a lot of people.
Right. So have you ever been completely surrounded by people? Like maybe you were at a party or a dinner or even just a busy open plan office.
Yeah, just anywhere with a lot of noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there is talking and laughing and you are responding to questions,
Mhm.
but inside you feel completely, utterly unseen.
You're not being actively ignored.
No, not at all. You aren't being pushed out of the circle by the group. But there is this profound sinking sense of being entirely alone right in the middle of all that noise.
Like your body's taking up space, but your mind feels a million miles away.
Yes. And if you've ever felt that way, well, this deep dive is exactly for you. Today we are looking at the source material called The Psychology of Loneliness in a Crowded Room.
Such a vital topic.
It really is. And our mission today is to figure out exactly why the loneliest place on earth can sometimes be a room absolutely packed with people.
And to really understand the underlying psychology of what your mind is doing when that happens.
Right. So where do we start with this?
Well, to really understand it, we have to start with a massive paradigm shift regarding how we define the concept of isolation.
Because we usually think of it as just
Correct.
physical, right?
Exactly. We operate under this deeply ingrained assumption that loneliness simply means being physically alone. If there's no one in the room with you, you're lonely.
And if there are 10 people, you're not.
Right, but modern psychology tells a completely different story. The research points out that loneliness is actually not about how many human bodies are physically located within a 10-foot radius of you.
It's about connection.
It is entirely about how connected you feel to those people. Presence does not equal connection. You can have an abundance of presence and an absolute famine of connection.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if presence doesn't equal connection, what is our brain actually looking for when we are standing in that crowded room?
It's a great question.
Because if it's not just the sound of other human voices, what is the underlying metric the brain uses to decide whether we are socially safe or isolated?
Well, the human brain is simply not satisfied with surface-level interaction. Evolutionarily speaking, our brains are constantly scanning the social environment.
Looking for threats.
Looking for threats, but also they are intensely hungry for depth. Specifically, the brain is scanning for three distinct markers in any social situation: understanding, recognition, and emotional safety.
Understanding, recognition, and emotional safety.
Got it. It doesn't just want to exchange pleasantries about the weather. It's constantly running a background algorithm asking, am I understood by this tribe?
Am I truly recognized for who I am?
Yes. And crucially, is it emotionally safe for me to drop my guard and exist here without a defense mechanism?
But hold on, isn't part of just functioning in a normal society playing the game to some extent? I mean, we can't dump our deepest, darkest thoughts on a coworker by the coffee machine.
Right, or a casual acquaintance at a barbecue.
Exactly. So where does the psychology draw the line between necessary, polite social functioning and this damaging lack of connection?
That is the perfect distinction to make. Polite functioning is a social tool, and the brain knows exactly what that tool is for.
Okay.
The issue arises when polite functioning becomes your entire social diet. This is where we encounter something known clinically as the observer effect.
The observer effect.
Yeah. When you lack those three markers we talked about, your brain initiates a psychological detachment mechanism. It essentially creates an avatar to handle the social interaction for you.
Which perfectly explains this incredibly relatable scenario from the source. I want you, the listener, to really picture this. You are sitting with a group of friends.
Everyone's talking over each other, having a good time.
Right. You are smiling, you are nodding, you are giving the right responses at the right times, but internally, you feel entirely like an observer.
You don't feel like a participant at all.
Your physical body is taking up space on that couch, but your mind is detached.
Exactly. And that specific gap, that vast cognitive distance between your physical presence in the room and your mental absence from the group, that is what we define as emotional loneliness.
Because you're filtering yourself.
Aggressively filtering yourself. You are sitting there engaging in the conversation, but you are carefully, meticulously choosing which sanitized version of yourself you are willing to project.
And the observer effect kicks in because your brain realizes that the avatar is the one interacting, not the true you.
Precisely. When you filter yourself like that for long enough, your mind starts to feel fundamentally separate from everyone else in the room.
You build a psychological wall.
And that dissociation is exactly what registers in your nervous system as profound loneliness.
So if filtering ourselves and relying on this avatar makes us feel so incredibly lonely and disconnected, why do we default to it? Why do we hide?
I don't do it for no reason.
Right. The psychology makes it very clear that this isn't just some random irrational quirk. It is a deeply entrenched learned behavior.
It comes from a very real, tangible experience.
Somewhere along the line, you took a risk. You dropped the avatar. You shared something real, something raw about yourself.
And it wasn't received well.
Maybe you were mocked or dismissed or just met with a blank stare, so your brain adapted.
Human beings are incredibly adaptable, especially when it comes to avoiding psychological pain. When that past vulnerability was met with rejection, your brain took detailed notes.
The amygdala logged it as a threat.
Yes, it learned that showing your true self is dangerous. So to ensure it doesn't happen again, you start developing a highly efficient internal monologue to justify keeping the mask firmly in place.
Yes, and the exact phrases we use in that internal monologue are fascinating because they're so universal.
Oh, absolutely.
We tell ourselves things like, it's not worth explaining. Or we think they won't understand anyway, so why bother?
Or we minimize our own reality by brushing it off with, it's really not that serious.
We use these phrases to convince our logical brain that staying quiet is just the practical, low-friction choice.
But the cognitive load of maintaining that friction, of constantly policing your own personality, it carries a massive cost.
Especially today.
Let's look at the reality of modern communication. You can spend your entire day interacting. You are firing off messages, taking Zoom calls, leaving reactions on people's stories.
You are technically communicating from morning until night.
Exactly.
And yet, as the analysis points out, after all of that all-day communication, you lie in bed at night and this deep, heavy emptiness washes over you.
You've technically conversed with 20 or 30 people.
But you feel completely isolated.
What's fascinating here is the brain's complete inability to be tricked by sheer volume. Your brain is a highly sophisticated instrument. It knows the fundamental difference between fake performative engagement and real vulnerability.
So every time you use one of those justifications.
Every single time you think it's not worth explaining and you actively choose silence instead of authenticity, your mind logs it as a 0.
Wow.
It registers that choice as a disconnection. It files it away as another discrete moment where you are not seen.
It's like you are keeping a subconscious ledger of all the micro-betrayals of your true self. And that ledger weighs a ton by the time you turn the lights out.
It really does.
But the psychology gets into even heavier, more complex territory here, moving into why we actually maintain this exhausting cycle day after day.
It introduces a darker, highly counterintuitive truth about this psychological state. We inherently tend to think of loneliness as an external force.
Something that happens to us.
Right, a tragic circumstance imposed upon us by a lack of friends or a new city. But the cognitive behavioral frameworks we are looking at reveal that sometimes we are the architects of our own isolation.
We're building the walls ourselves.
We are actively using loneliness as a self-protective shield.
No, I have to push back on that a bit because no one wants to be lonely. Suggesting that people choose this isolation almost sounds like blaming them for a state they desperately want to escape.
It does sound like that at first.
How does the psychology justify the idea that we're willingly putting up a shield?
It's a great point, and it's not about blame. It's about understanding a maladaptive risk management system in the brain.
Okay.
If you go into an interaction already anticipating disappointment, your brain calculates that the safest bet is to simply stop trying.
So you stay quiet, you keep your opinions neutral.
You remain emotionally distant. And you aren't doing this because you want to be lonely. Yeah. You are doing it because the acute, sharp sting of putting your real self out there and not being understood registers in the brain as a massive threat.
So the dull, chronic ache of just being alone in the crowd feels like a safer baseline.
Much safer, more predictable.
The anticipation of disappointment, that makes perfect sense. It's essentially preemptive grief.
Exactly.
Think about this scenario for a second. You're in a conversation, and a moment arises where you genuinely want to say something honest. You have a real thought bubbling up right to the surface.
But then the risk management system kicks in.
You hit the brakes. And instead of sharing that truth, you just shrug off her a polite smile and say it's fine.
We have all done it. But look at the physiological and psychological reality of what happens in that exact precise moment.
When you choose to say it's fine.
Right. When you say it's fine instead of your actual truth, you are actively severing a potential tether. You are willingly taking a step backward.
Moving one step further away from being emotionally seen by the person right in front of you.
You are prioritizing the absolute safety of the shield over the wild, unpredictable risk of genuine connection.
And if this internal biological battle wasn't exhausting enough, we have to talk about the ultimate amplifier for this kind of isolation, social media.
Oh yeah, the great amplifier.
Now, we all know the feed is a curated highlight reel. I don't need to explain to a well-informed listener that people only post their vacations and their good hair days.
That'll help news.
But what really struck me in the research is how our brains fundamentally fail to process that logic when we are endlessly scrolling.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex, your logical brain, knows it's a filter. It knows its curation.
But your mammalian brain doesn't.
Right. The part of you that evolved to survive in small tribes doesn't understand the concept of Instagram. When you are scrolling, watching groups of people laughing together, seemingly bonding in these perfect, frictionless ways, your deep brain is processing those images as literal reality.
And it comes to a very quiet and completely devastating conclusion.
It looks at the screen, triggers a tribal panic, and decides everyone belongs except me.
Everyone belongs except me. That is a terrifying conclusion for the nervous system to reach.
Because evolutionarily, if you don't belong to the tribe, you don't survive.
The logic of it's just a curated photo is completely overridden by the amygdala screaming that you've been left behind. The constant comparison directly increases our perceived isolation.
It magnifies the feeling that we're uniquely broken or uniquely left out of the human experience.
Which is exactly why it is so crucial to clearly define what kind of pain we are actually experiencing, rather than just lumping it all under the generic umbrella of feeling sad.
Absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the analysis pivots from the triggers, like social media and social gatherings, right into the actual clinical definitions of what we are dealing with.
It separates loneliness into two very distinct categories.
And the distinction is entirely necessary to understand how to move forward.
Right. The psychological framework distinguishes sharply between physical loneliness and emotional loneliness.
Let's define those for the listener.
Physical loneliness is straightforward and literal. It is the state of having absolutely no one around you. It's an empty room. It's geographic isolation.
And emotional loneliness.
Emotional loneliness, on the other hand, is the state of having no one understand you completely, regardless of how many physical bodies are occupying the same space as you.
And the consensus in the field makes a very definitive statement about these two types. It says that emotional loneliness actually inflicts significantly more psychological distress.
It hurts more because of the intense cognitive dissonance it creates, and because it feels entirely invisible.
Right. Because if you are physically alone in an empty house, the reason for your loneliness is obvious to your brain.
The room is empty. The input matches the output.
But if you are emotionally lonely in a crowded room, there is a massive dissonance between your environment, which is full of people, and your internal state, which is starving for connection.
Furthermore, this isolation is invisible to everyone else. And because it is invisible, it feels deeply, incredibly personal to you.
Like a fundamental failure of your own ability to connect, rather than just a circumstance of geography.
Exactly.
And that brings us to one of the most important takeaways from this entire deep dive. If you are listening to this right now and recognizing your own behaviors in these scenarios, if you feel that invisible gnawing ache of emotional loneliness,
The psychological consensus is very clear.
feeling this way does not mean that your social mechanics are broken. It does not mean that you're fundamentally unlovable or incapable of deep friendship.
Not at all.
It simply means that your very human, very valid need for depth is currently running on empty.
I am so glad you highlighted that because it completely reframes the narrative away from pathology.
Society often pushes this aggressive idea that being effortlessly easygoing and thriving on surface-level banter is the absolute ideal way to exist.
But the clinical perspective argues the opposite. Craving emotional honesty over surface-level connection is not a flaw. It is not a weakness.
It's actually a sign of acute neurological sensitivity.
Yes, some minds are quite literally built to crave that depth. It's an evolutionary asset for deep tribal bonding, and when they are starved of it in a superficial environment, they sound the alarm. They feel lonely.
So if we are wired for depth, but our risk management systems are terrified of rejection, what do we actually do? How do we break the cycle without overwhelming our nervous system?
Well, one thing that is universally agreed upon is that typical well-meaning advice is often terrible.
People will tell you, you just need to open up more, just put yourself out there, be vulnerable.
But the psychological literature rejects that completely.
Telling someone who is actively utilizing an emotional mask to just open up more is like telling someone with a profound fear of heights to just go skydiving to get over it.
It completely ignores the very real, very valid fear of rejection that caused the brain to put the mask on in the first place.
Precisely. You cannot force a sudden, massive behavioral change when the fear response is that deeply ingrained in your neural pathways.
The goal, according to the psychology we are looking at today, isn't forced dramatic change. The goal is simply awareness.
It's about paying attention to your micro-choices in the moment.
It's about exposure therapy and social dynamics. You start by noticing that every single time you choose authenticity, even in a tiny, seemingly insignificant way, you are actively reducing that internal distance between yourself and the rest of the world.
It's about microdosing authenticity, taking those tiny small steps instead of leaping off a cliff into total vulnerability.
There is this incredibly powerful concept we explored that really anchors this idea.
The golden rule. It states, one honest sentence is more powerful than 100 safe ones.
Just one single honest sentence.
You don't have to spill your deepest, darkest childhood traumas to the entire dinner party. You just have to find one tiny moment to not say it's fine and to instead say what you actually mean.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire psychological framework we've been discussing serves a profound purpose.
Understanding the brain's cravings, the observer, affect the mask.
Right. Once you understand the mechanics of what your mind is doing and why it is building these walls to protect you, the loneliness stops feeling like a personal failure.
It stops being a character flaw.
And it becomes a biological process that you can simply observe, understand, and gently, slowly begin to dismantle.
It takes the shame right out of the equation.
Yeah.
And once the shame is gone, the fear loses a lot of its power.
Absolutely.
So to wrap up our deep dive today, the core message from the psychological research is that feeling unseen in a crowd is a perfectly logical biological response from a brain that is desperately trying to protect you from past pain.
But that protection comes at the heavy cost of actual connection.
Understanding why your mind builds these walls of emotional loneliness and recognizing the avatar you project is the absolute first step toward finally feeling seen.
It really is.
So what does this all mean? It means the mask you are wearing makes total sense, but it is also the very thing keeping you locked in isolation.
Yeah.
Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Something for you to really mull over long after this deep dive is done.
Okay.
If emotional loneliness happens because we're all walking around, utilizing these cognitive detachment mechanisms, carefully filtering ourselves to protect against the sting of rejection, how many of those other people in that crowded room are secretly feeling the exact same invisible isolation as you?
Wow.
What if the person sitting next to you on the couch laughing at all the right times, nodding in agreement, is also screaming on the inside feeling completely unseen?
Mm.
What if absolutely everyone in the room is just desperately waiting for someone else to be brave enough to drop the mask first?
That is a profound question to walk away with.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the psychology of loneliness in a crowded room. Take care of yourselves, and we will catch you next time.